What we have for us today is the largest set of tuning of the season. Very significant nerfs coming along for multiple specs, and yes, also a series of decent buffs to quite a few others. However, for today, to stay on with the times, we're not going to be like an old school anime where I put the fillers in front of you and put the new arc later. This time we go for the three main arcs back to back to back and then leave all of the filler at the bottom. So we start with the main arc, and for the main arc, as it has been kind of the tune, this expansion, the beginning of this expansion, we don't start with the DPS. The main arc, the main focus is starting with healers, because what we start with is with the nerf to this bar right here.
Oh, no,
Even if we don't look at all of the best players and just the overall bar, that's the change. Because Flame Shaper Evoker, let's make a distinction, it's not Preservation Evoker, it's Flame Shaper that's being nerfed, gets their Consume Flame kneecapped. Now it heals for 50% less.
Oh, no.
Now, quick maths, if your Engulf, which is, Consume Flame, is doing almost 40% of your damage and it's cut by 50%, it's almost a 20% healing nerf. So, numbers wise, if you go back to the results and you see that the median healing of a Preservation Evoker is 1.25 million, if you reduce that by 20%, they go back to 1 million. It's a 250,000 HPS nerf. So if they go back to 1 million, where's the median of 1 million? Well, it's here. It's below everyone. So that's where they go, in the bin. Now, the big mistake of this is the fact that only Flame Shaper is being nerfed. The big mistake is thinking that the only option of Evoker is Flame Shaper, and once it's nerfed here, it's over. The problem is that Evoker also has Chrono Warden, and Chrono Warden is also very good because it's just like normal Evoker before Consume Flame playstyle took over. They still do massive echo spreads to use massively empowered Spirit Blooms for massive burst healing. They still have all of their cooldowns, they can still play with Dream Breath, Hot Blanket, Hot Spreading, etc, etc. They are still a very good healing spec. So even if this gets kneecapped and Flame Shaper becomes dead completely, you will still have an Evoker at the very minimum around here. Except now it will be Chrono Warden and it will be more balanced. The only mistake in this nerf, because it's a completely correct nerf in terms of who it is targeting, the mistake is in nerfing Flame Shaper too much and not the base healing of Evoker. The correct nerf would have been nerfing the Consume Flame by half as much, so by 10%, and then putting a 10% nerf to the base Evoker healing. So Dream Breath, Reversion, Spirit Bloom, that kind of stuff. Because Chrono Warden is still very powerful and likely too powerful. You're just not seeing it yet because of how powerful Flame Shaper was. But it is still a very powerful spec and likely will be nerfed in the next few weeks after, you see more logs of Chrono Warden and you see how well it's doing. And also after weeding out all of the terrible flavor of the month rerollers that were just abusing Flame Shaper and have no idea on how to actually play Evoker. But the idea of the nerf was correct, to just tone down this abomination. Now we can go back to the DPS. Now we can go back to the damage nerfs. However, we don't have to stay here. This is all damage. The picture is painted better if we go to all damage. This thing right here, BM. Now, I understand. You will be asking, hold on a second, we just went to all damage. And Fire and Arcane were at the top. And then we went to single target damage and Fire and Arcane are at the top. And then we go to Mythic Plus, and when it comes to range DPS, Mage is the most broad DPS. In fact, the second best Mage is better than almost all of the other specs to begin with, and all of the top picks have a Mage in their groups. So why is BM the one being nerfed? Because the other two specs are Mage, and Mage is contractually obligated by Blizzard to be OP at any given point in any expansion. So BM is the one that gets nerfed. Massive nerf to their single target damage. Many players, without a clear idea of how Beast Mastery works, were wondering, hold on a second, this makes no sense. You're just nerfing this talent, but you're buffing kill command and buffing the pet damage. How is this a nerf? We have talked about this in the past couple of weeks when mentioning the horrible state of AoE damage of Beast Mastery, mentioning that they are here because they are being kept hostage, they are being kept prisoner by the power of Basilisk Collar, and also having to revolve a few other talents around this talent right here. What this does is 10% more pet damage per dot effect. This becomes a problem because as a BM hunter you have 1, and then 2, and then 3, and then 4, and then technically you could also get to 5. So we are using the max possible potential of this talent. 5 possible dots, 50% more damage. Now you, as a BM hunter, are doing almost 70% of your damage with your pet. So that is being increased by 50%, so 35% of that damage increase comes almost exclusively from this talent. Now, this one is being nerfed from 10% damage to 4% damage. So now, instead of getting a 50% damage increase with 5 dots, you gain a 20% damage increase. So your 70% pet damage is not increased by 35% because of this talent, but by 15% because of this talent. So it's practically a 20% DPS nerf by nerfing this talent. That's how much damage you had on this talent. You know, other talents, for example, 1 point in Venom's Bite, 1 point in Murder of Crows. Murder of Crows is 2.6% damage for 1 point. Serpent Sting, 0.8% damage for 1 point. This one right here, Basilisk Collar, was 20% damage for 2 points. So 10% DPS for a single point. That's how powerful it was in single target. Now, the nerf is not actually 20% damage because you have the compensation buffs. You have 4% damage increase to your pets, 16% damage to your kill command. It's closer to a 9% damage nerf to your single target. Even then, that will be quite hurtful, because if you were to nerf this median DPS of 850,000 by 9%, you would be at 770. So if we scroll down until we find 770, you will be around here. So you would go from having terrible AoE and best single target to having bad AoE and mediocre bottom half single target. So it's not good. It's not good. I'm sure there are some possible solutions that BM hunters will cook up, like, you know, changing their talent setup to go and pick something else and somehow not make this nerf nearly as bad. But for now, it's a pretty bad change for BM. They tried to buff their AoE at the last patch. This change, the compensation buff, also buffs their AoE, but by only 10%, which is still not nearly enough to be good. So it's a bad series of changes for BM. It's good. The idea is good because you needed to nerf this damage to not make this talent nearly as powerful, to not force you to go and take shit talents that don't do much just because this one is so powerful, etc, etc. But the way they went at it wasn't that good. That was the problem with this change to Beast Mastery. We have to move back again, hogging all of the spotlight to healing though, because the next change is the 5% healing nerf to Holy Paladin. We will have also similar other changes to most of the other specs we are leaving in the back to hero talents. Lightsmith gets buffed because it's the underplayed hero talent for Holy Paladin, so they are trying to make it more playable. Will not be the case for Holy, they will still play Herald of the Sun, and they get nerfed by 5%. This has created quite the debate within the community, especially because of misunderstandings. You know, players talking about how OP it was in the raid, and then people answering on how mediocre it was in Mythic Plus, and then people telling them they were topping the meters, and people answering to them, no they were not, because they weren't being played, right? They were talking about different things, raid and Mythic Plus. In Mythic Plus, they do not need to be nerfed. In Mythic Plus, they are not the weakest of the healers, but they're also not the strongest, or not like that strong. They're normal in Mythic Plus. Definitely pale in comparison to Resto Shaman, but that's not a fair comparison. So in Mythic Plus wasn't really necessary any change. So this is a bad change for Mythic Plus to begin with. However, the biggest debate is in the raid, because no matter what you look at, if it's overall healing, if it's literally the best players in the world in terms of logs, still second behind this one, which is about to be nerfed. If you go back to the averagely good players, it is still first, because this one doesn't count. Now, if you were to nerf this by 5% on 1.2 million, it's a 60,000 HPS nerf. So you go to about 1,040,000. So you would go to about here, right? Slightly below discipline. Now, this debate has lasted for 10, 15, possibly even 20 years on the concept, the dogma, that a Holy Paladin should never be allowed to be anywhere near here in terms of HPS results. Why? Because they have Devotion Aura. Because whenever you look at the healing done of a Paladin, you also have to add roughly 10% of their healing because of Devotion Aura, which the other healers don't have. So it's unfair for a Paladin to be here, because if a Paladin is ever here, they will always be brought, because on top of this they also bring Devotion Aura, right? Now, in this expansion, very uniquely, you also have Red Paladin being taken, so the Devotion Aura debate is not nearly as big of a problem anymore. But you do still get an idea on how large the entitlement is for Paladin players, because of how used they have gotten to having a free raid spot for practically 20 years. You can see one of the best, one of the best Paladins, Clarius, extremely good players. I'm gonna use your rank 1 log on Broad Twister as an example. Clarius saying, oh my god, they are thinking for the first time in years on benching a Holy Paladin. He is so used to being this free of a raid spot that he doesn't even realize how insane of a statement this is if you put this in the mouth of a Mistweaver Monk, or a RDruid, or a RSham. Oh no, we are being nerfed again and we risk not being brought into a raid for the first time in 8 years. That's a sentence nobody else can say outside of Holy Paladin. They are the only one who can say something like this, because of how for granted they have given for so many years that one spot in the raid was theirs, and theirs only. So, for me, it's hard to feel any pity or any sadness for them being nerfed, because they are the only spec in the entire game, practically, to always have gotten a free raid spot, no matter what, no matter when. So, as far as I'm concerned, they can be deleted from the game for the next 4 expansions, and they would still not make up for the amount of spots they have taken in the raid, compared to Shaman, compared to Mistweaver, and compared to RDruid. So, I don't feel too bad about this nerf to Holy Paladin. Now, these were the 3 main changes, and these were all nerfs. Now we have the remaining ones when it comes to the balance tuning. Now, some are boring and mostly pointless. We don't have to spend too much time to talk about it, like Sun Lane being buffed for blood, attempting to make Sun Lane more playable compared to Deathbringer. Spoiler, it is not. Good attempt, nice idea, still not good enough. Then you have Aldrachi, River for Havoc. Now, it should send Blizzard a message when it is the Havoc players themselves wishing for Blizzard not to buff Aldrachi, because of how much they don't want to play Aldrachi River. Now, with this buff, technically speaking, Aldrachi River is now a better single target result than Felskard. With perfect play, no interruptions, they are better. Very unlikely Demon Hunter players will actually bother to switch to Aldrachi River for such a small gain in single target, compared to how clunky it is to play. Then we have Vengeance. The changes to Vengeance are decent, especially when you consider their state in Mythic Plus is not doing too good right now. They are very squishy, they are made of paper like a Blood Decay, but they don't have as good of a healing as a Blood Decay and as good of a set of cooldowns as Blood Decay. So their healing is increased, they get a buff to their mastery, which is good, because mastery for a Vengeance Demon Hunter is practically never taken, so it tried to make it more useful for you. And then they get a buff to their healing. Soul Barrier buffed, hoping that one time in history they will actually take this and make use of this. Still unlikely for that to happen, but at least it's good to, identify that this is one of the tanks that should be buffed. After after them, we have, this is a bit sad, after we had the whole bit about BM Hunters and the fact that they were being targeted over Mage. Yes, we have Mage buffs, of course. Blizzard was more worried about nerfing the single target damage of BM, but they were also worried about the fact that Frostfire for Mage wasn't performing nearly as well. So Frost Mage and Fire Mage gets Frostfire buffed. They get a 6 to 7% single target buff for Frostfire, which is still 10% something damage behind in single target against its respective competitors, Spellslinger for Frost and Sun Fury for Fire, so it's still a no-go in single target, but this will become a reasonable option, an actual competitor in terms of AoE for both Fire and Frost. Now, both of them can actually play Frostfire over Sun Fury or Frostfire over Spellslinger when it comes to Mythic Plus, when it comes to AoE. That's the main news of the changes for Mage. Good changes for monks, especially, or rather, the changes are good because of Master of Harmony. So, Master of Harmony is buffed predominantly for Brewmaster. The buffs are to the damage of Master of Harmony because Shadowpan, the competitor, has way more damage than Master of Harmony. You can see even when Brewmaster is not doing well, one thing they can bank on doing well is their damage when they play Shadowpan. So the competitor doing much less damage is being buffed in their damage output, which is necessary because Master of Harmony is the tankier option for Brewmaster at the cost of damage. Now the damage is being buffed a bit more for Brewmaster. Now, despite Holy Paladin being nerfed, we do have actually the largest of the buffs going the way of Prot. Funny that it comes after Brewmaster, because if Brewmaster is not really played a lot, but it has very good damage, Prot Paladin not only is being played little, it also has easily the worst damage. So they get a 6% damage buff overall to their damage, and then 20% more healing buff to Word of Glory, and a series of carpet buffs, very good ones, some of these, to Lightsmith. Now, what is special about these Lightsmith buffs is that some of the other specs we have mentioned, like Sun Lane being buffed for Blood, Aldrachi being buffed for Havoc, a couple more we will mention soon, as well as the ones we mentioned for Frost and Fire Mage, were two hero talents that were terrible. You know, they were not really being played, not really an option. It was more Blizzard trying to make them playable. This is not the case for Prot Paladin, because when it comes to the talent options of Prot Paladin, you already have Lightsmith as a possible playable hero talent. Like, it's nowhere near the unplayable state of some of the other specs. It's already a decent competitor. What it was lacking in particular was in damage. It was already the tankier option between the two. Damage was missing, and now they're getting more buffs in particularly across the board for the hero talent, especially in the damage buffs of Lightsmith. So if it goes above or matching Templar, then it will go back to being an actually decent or even better option than Templar. So the first of the relevant changes to the hero talents of a spec, when it comes to buffs at least, we've already seen the nerfs already to Flameshaper Evoker. Same treatment as well given to Red Paladin for the same reasons. We mentioned a while ago that Red Paladin was playing Templar, and then they discovered all of a sudden that Herald of the Sun was actually kind of better, so they just all played it. Doesn't matter if it was Mythic Plus or if it was the raid, Herald of the Sun was just better, right? So Templar is being buffed as well. Talking about buffs and talking about hero talents that are not nearly as played, you have the same thing actually that happened to Ret happening to Shadow Priest. Because Shadow Priest began with Void Weaver, Blizzard nerfed Void Weaver 43 times, until Shadow Priest went, fine, I'm playing Archon now. And now Blizzard is like, why aren't you guys playing Void Weaver? So they are buffing Void Weaver. On top of buffing the default damage of Shadow Priest, this is a 2 to 3% damage buff, plus another 3 to 4% damage buff to Void Weaver, which brings it now almost at the same level as Archon. Now the 2 to 3% damage buff, you know, it's hard to see major improvement. Their median results right now going from 911 to 930-ish would bring them, you know, here, you know, great improvement, but there's still more needed for Shadow Priest to be doing well this season. We are not done, however, talking about healers. So back to healing, because we have to talk about the 5% healing buff to RDruid. I mean, we don't have to talk about too much, we simply have to point out that from the beginning of the expansion, RDruid has been buffed by now almost 20% in healing. Now, I am starting to fear that this has been a whole season of gaslighting by RDruid. I think they are much more powerful than they are letting show from here, and with the incoming reset they will go up to be the second best, close to Evoker healer in the raid. You know, already if you look at, you know, good results of Restoration Druids, they are already very close, and with this nerf, with this buff by another 5%, you wonder how has the treatment not gone to a few other specs, perhaps, for example, like Mistweaver, or for example, Mythic Plus healers like Holy Priest or like Discipline Priest. It has only gone week after week after week just to RDruid. That's the somewhat weird part about these sets of changes, you know, it's just as if Blizzard focused specifically on buffing RDruid over and over and over, and quite a few of the other healing specs that might have needed some good buffs have not really gotten them. But besides that, I'm gonna leave my judgment for later, because I think I'm being tricked about how weak this looks for RDruid. Possibly surprising changes or confusing changes or weird changes going the way of Outlaw. Outlaw has lost out this season to Assassination across the board. They are getting a 4% damage buff across the board and a 6% damage buff to Dispatch, which is, you know, their major single target finisher and major Blade Flurry AoE cleave spread damage ability. So it's a decent buff. Even if you were just to look at these results, this 6-ish% damage increase would bring them actually well into this range already. What is more interesting though are the buffs for single target, because actually now from 913,000 in the median results, if they had this buff and we just applied it to these results in the 970,000 median, which would bring them here, right? So it's a more significant change for single target and for the raid results. So it's an interesting set of changes to Outlaw when it comes to both single target and AoE, because the buffs are benefiting both types of damage. After them, or we could say skipping them, is Shaman. Resto Shaman doesn't really get nerfed. They get a damage nerf to Acid Rain, which will bring this average damage down to about 170-ish thousand. Now, this is where you wonder why, if you are aware of the damage, the free damage Resto Shaman can do, why aren't you also nerfing this free damage of Preservation Evoker? That would be the same logic, but perhaps Blizzard felt bad about the nerf they just gave to Flame Shaper, so they were like, let's just wait a couple of weeks before nerfing Preservation Evoker damage. You know, it would be too mean to also nerf their damage on this reset after what we're about to do to Flame Shaper, bring it by the collar behind the shed and then bury it in an unmarked grave. I think also nerfing the damage would have been a bit tactless. Shaman though gets away with it. Shaman gets a minor nerf to the damage reduction of their Earth Shield, which is, it's annoying, but you can't really complain right now, given the amount of tools you have in Mythic Plus. That was a good tool. It still is a good tool, not as strong as it was before. After Shaman, you have the changes to Demo, which is one of the weakest performers right now in the meta. This was last week, last reset in Mythic Plus. Demo was the weakest performer, and also Demo was the least played of the Warlocks. When we move over to the damage in the raid, single target results, Demo is doing awful. You go back to all damage, so maybe you have some room to be a specifically good AoE spec. You're not. You are still terrible. So you're getting buffed. The problem is this is not even a 3% buff for Demo. That's kind of the issue. So you needed a buff, but this buff is not doing much for the spec. That's the point about the changes to Demo. More changes are to be said though about Warrior. Now the list is long. This looks like it's pretty big, right? This is exclusively, almost exclusively, a hero talent set of changes because Mountain is being buffed across the board. First is being buffed as a hero talent, so it's gonna affect Protection Warrior as well. And then it's being buffed specifically for Fury Warrior as well. So double buff basically for Fury Warrior when it comes to Mountain. But then the other hero talents are touched as well, because you have Colossus being buffed, and who could have thought Slayer is being nerfed. At the moment, Arms Warriors are just one tricking Slayer right now in the raid, a bit more option in Mythic Plus, but still a vast advantage when it comes to Slayer. Fury Warriors are even more lopsided in terms of talents. It's almost exclusively Slayer everywhere you go. So Slayer gets nerfed, pretty hefty nerfs as well. Culling Cyclone is now buffing Bladestorm by half as much, and then Opportunist going from 30 to 20% bonus damage to your Overpower or Raging Blow. So Slayer is nerfed for both Arms and Fury, and then Mountain is buffed for Fury, and Colossus is being buffed for Arms. So purely for these results, purely for the hero talents being played here, these are both nerfs, because both of these results right now are playing with Slayer, and Slayer here is being nerfed. So we will see how this will affect the two underplayed hero talents, Mountain and Colossus, but for the time being, these two register as nerfs for both of the warriors. However, of course, neither of the two were as big as the major nerfs we mentioned at the beginning of the video as our main dish for the day. Flameshaper Evoker, Holy Paladin, and BM Hunter as the mainstay nerfs for today. Then the bigger buff was Protection Paladin, followed by Outlaw Rogue, and the bigger of the potential buffs to underplayed hero talents, which might become now the playable one, we have Frostfire in AoE for Frost and Fire Mage, as well as Templar for Red Paladin and Void Weaver for Shadow Priest. These were the main changes coming in the next reset, Tuesday or Wednesday, in a few days, when it comes to balance tuning to specs as well as hero talents. So with this recap, we had doubts yesterday about it, but now we are definitely in the weekend. We can now leave each other. We are going to be, of course, live once more on stream by the time this video will come out. I have a need of doing a bunch of scuffed keys for my alt, so please feel free to join. With this out of the way, of course, still thanks for the support by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing completely for free to the channel itself. And with this out of the way, we can now leave each other. Thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, I don't mind the sun now. Temperature is down, by 10 degrees compared to before, so even if it's sunny, it's kind of okay.